Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and you're in for a treat today. One, we have Jana Brost, the Chief Operating Officer at my COI. And as you're going to find out, I have an interest in this arena. But more importantly, she's going to talk about the intersection of compliance, risk management, AI in a way that you probably haven't thought of before. And so I hope you'll be able to take a lot of the lessons she's going to give us in this podcast and apply them to your own corporation. So with that incredibly long-winded introduction, first of all, welcome, Jana, and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
Absolutely, Tom. So excited to connect with you, and thanks for the opportunity to chat.
So could you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Absolutely. So I always say I'm a recovering entrepreneur. So I've been in the high growth SaaS kind of VC world most of my career, focusing on typically business process outsourcing businesses as well as data analysis companies. And what led me to my current role at my COI is I have known our founder and CEO for the better part of 10 years. So she and I connected in one of those great like CEO networking forums and built a strong relationship, got to know her, got to know the company, have kind of always been one of those flag waving fans from the sideline. And so when the opportunity came up for me to join the company, I hopped right on board. So I serve as our COO, which means I'm responsible for all customer delivery and really the well being of our internal teams as well. So that's a little bit about me.
So could we start with the basics, which is what is a COI?
Absolutely. So the way that I like to describe this is kind of a real life scenario. So let's say you're a construction company, right? And a construction company wins a bid to build a new hospital or a new structure, right? So that construction company has a contract with their customer, with the hospital, and it says, "Hey, you've got to have this type of coverage. There's all these regulations and stipulations to make sure that everyone's covered from a risk perspective." And then obviously a construction company isn't doing all of the work themselves. They are coordinating masterfully, might I say, a group of vendors and people that are coming onto the job site or serving in other capacities that really open not only the construction company, but that hospital that's getting built up to risk and exposure. As the construction company attests to the fact that they have a specific amount of coverage and types of coverage, insurance coverage that is, they need to make sure that all of their subcontractors and vendors have the same. So many times COIs come into play to prove that those vendors have the right level of coverage. And as you can imagine, if you wake up one morning and decide that your passion is to start a construction company, the likelihood of managing COIs is not on the top of your list, but it's critical to the continuity of your business. So that's what a COI is. It basically attests to the fact that you have a specific level of coverage and type of coverage and really attests and documents that. So pretty fundamental to making sure these projects go off without a hitch.
So the listeners to this podcast are both corporate compliance professionals and other corporate executives. So what I'd like to do now is maybe talk through what is risk management, how insurance works into this to help shift risk by providing coverage for events, and then tie that all into COI. So let me see if I can maybe start at the bottom, because insurance is typically seen as a way to manage or even shift risk to others. Typically, that means an insurance company, and you pay a premium and you get so much coverage. And in the commercial context, so I come out of the petrochemical industry as opposed to the construction industry, where I represented contractors on a plant site. And the contractor's book of COIs would be a notebook about this thick. And then the plant owner would be a book about this thick. And literally, there was one guy or one woman who had the notebook, and that's what we called it, the COI notebook. And it had to be at a place you could see from their desk in case they weren't there, so you could pull it out. And that's how you would tell. But the criticality was, if you didn't have that proof of insurance for the specific limits, and the named beneficiaries, whether it was an additional insured or others, you couldn't be assured that your risk was managed and protected. So I was wondering, I know that's a very long-winded way of introducing this topic, but could you maybe explain how you help these companies understand the risk management process that you guys provide?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So my COI has been at it for over 15 years. And we've seen quite a bit of evolution in the marketplace. To your point, it used to be that most companies had one person that managed this. And yeah, that notebook was critical. And having quick access to the data and validated data was so important. So when it comes to my COI, and I think kind of leading to some of the topics that we'll get into today, the first kind of evolution of the industry was, wow, this is a very specialized task, right? You think about issuing a COI, and that's a pretty standard process. However, when it comes to contractual requirements, changes in regulations, changes in business models that happen every single day, how in the world do you keep up with that? And how do you have someone that just owns that expertise internally? For the past 15 years, my COI has been that kind of third party subject matter expert that sits in the middle of customer and vendor relationships to help facilitate that and to make sure that, yes, as you are shifting the risk to the insurance company, that everyone's on the same page, right? This stuff can get pretty detailed pretty fast. And now with the advent of AI, there's just some very unique ways based off of customer demand that you can apply AI to our business model and our industry to not only improve the customer experience, but speed things up quite a bit.
So I still do contract work in the petrochemical industry. It's probably 20 contracts a week,
Hmm.
maybe 10 to 20. And everyone has different insurance requirements,
Mhm.
literally. So could you talk about first the experience from the vendor side and how AI has helped in the vendor side? Then I'm going to go to over to the owner side or the contractor side. So could we start with the vendor or subcontractor? How does my COI help manage that where they have multiple levels of insurance required under a contract and then they have to show satisfaction to those amounts?
Absolutely. So I think just at a broad level, before we dive into like vendor and owner, like we've seen three key kind of industry shifts. And I'd say that this isn't just in the compliance space, but I think just as consumers, as we think about how AI can be applied to our lives, we hope that AI not only speeds up processes, but we hope that it also makes processes more efficient and precise and accurate. But then I think and this is where I'll touch on from the vendor perspective. I think one of the things that we're seeing with AI is this idea of, hey, can you do this for me? We see these legacy technologies. Think about Adobe InDesign. It used to be that people sat at their computers, and they still can, and design all these beautiful visuals, right? But now you can kind of interact with something where it can do it for you and build out your design for you. So let's take that kind of do it for me concept and let's apply it down to the vendor level. Because at the end of the day, these vendors did not wake up and dream of providing COIs to their contractors and to their customers, but they did dream about doing the work that they love. And so when it comes to the nitty gritty kind of detail that comes into making sure that you're matching insurance coverage to the COI and communicating that to the vendor, you can do some really interesting things in guiding that vendor along in the process. So if you think about from an education perspective, so not only are you extracting exactly what they need to be providing, but then explaining it and communicating it in a way that someone that's not a compliance expert or doesn't want to be a compliance expert can do. So, not to get too in the weeds, but when it comes to AI, whether it's agentic AI or chatbots that really sit on top of a large language model that's robust and has some expertise, you can really create like a guided user experience for the vendors where they don't feel like they have to become insurance experts overnight. So that'd be kind of my example from for the vendor. How much can you kind of guide and do it for them so they don't feel like they have to have that huge wealth of information behind them?
How about now for the owner or contractor?
Yeah, so I think this is where those first 2 themes really come into play of people just expect now with software, how can you do something faster and how can you increase the level of precision, right? Speed is one thing, but if we're discounting quality at for speed, then that's not what we want to do. So for the owner, let me give some kind of very specific examples. For the owner, what they care about is they care about these vendors getting to compliance as quickly as possible. So, where you can leverage AI models to do almost instant compliance review and provide like instant compliance scores and help guide them to see where their gaps in coverage are, those are actions that can cut off days of a project cycle life. And we could put dollars to that. And then from the accuracy perspective, anytime that you're working with just again, we've been at this for 15 years. And so as we develop new software and launch new products, it's from that bedrock of 15 years of serving hundreds of customers. So we have the ability to kind of guide in our customers in a way that others might not. So from the owner perspective, sure, yeah, we'll be able to guide them in the same way and kind of help do it for them as the vendors, but speed and accuracy are the things that we're really hearing from the marketplace today, Tom.
And let me pick up on that because one of the things I advocate for compliance professionals is that AI will allow you to manage risk more quickly and more efficiently. And I can't think of a more transitional time for US business than we've had in the first half of the year, the first quarter of 2025. And that's risk are changing. They're changing sometimes daily, sometimes even every half a hour, half a day they changed. But when your risks change, your risk management strategy has to change. Does the process you guys go through help a company, whether it's in the regulatory arena, whether it's on the ground in a construction site with other risks, things like climate, workforce, um, union relations, anything that affects them? Can you help them manage that risk more quickly or at least put a strategy in place to potentially manage that risk?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing that we talk about with clients, especially if they're transitioning from an in-house methodology for managing the COIs, is, even the smartest person, to your point, is likely out of date, right? With just the changes that happen from a regulatory perspective, how can you expect one human being to not only hold all that knowledge, but then apply it to the hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors and projects that they have going on at a very specific time? And so again, this is definitely one of those areas where as changes happen to the business, as coverage needs changes, as types of coverage change, this is where you can kind of quickly analyze where you have gaps based off of those new kind of what if scenarios. Great question, Tom.
I have one friend in compliance who says the only issue is the UX all
Mhm.
the time, ever. And I wanted to use that to ask you about what do you guys, what is my COI? What are the questions you get from customers about their expectations they have of you all and your company for the use of AI? Are customer expectations evolving or changing, or is it more you trying to educate your customer base or potential customer base about what's available to them now?
Yeah, sure. Great question. We really believe that the best source of innovation comes from customer empathy. And the beautiful thing about what we do every single day is for many of our customers, we become that kind of like outsourced set of hands and feet to do the work on their behalf. So not only are we feeling the burden and feeling the responsibility of the COI process, but we're kind of sitting side by side with the customers. So when it comes to who has the bright idea for the next solution, it's all coming from that extreme empathy for our customers. And it's with that in mind that we recently launched a new platform called Illumined. So we know we've got, again, hundreds of customers that we provide the COI outsourcing process for and do a majority of the work on their behalf. But Tom, to your point, we're seeing some shifts in customer demand. More customers are coming to us being interested in kind of taking over the process themselves. And with the advent of AI, that process is becoming more and more attainable for our customers because of the kind of guidance and support that we can provide throughout the process. So we might bring the kind of like super geeky technical, here's how you would apply software to solve that problem. But so much of it, so much of the inspiration is coming from the bedrock of our customer base.
I would certainly understand if you sat down with a company's insurance agent or other risk manager who asked part of their overall portfolio is management of risk, which of course insurance is one of the strategies. But what do you say to a CEO or perhaps even a board about the power of the services your company brings and how it will make them not only run more efficiently and more safely, but also help them manage risk more quickly? How do you have that conversation at a very high level?
Sure. The beauty about this business is it can be completely quantifiable, right? Because most of our customers are looking to work with a vendor to complete a task so they can complete an overall project, they can move a tenant in, they can, right? So we can get down to what's the cost of not acting within a specific period of time? What's the cost of a project if it delays by 3 or 4 weeks? What's the cost of a vacancy sitting open longer than what you would like? And so I think that there's some real like high revenue dollar costs that and expense costs that we can have conversations about. But on the flip side, this truly is one of those scary things as a business owner. What don't you know that you don't know? Those blind spots that really keep people up at night. And so, for a very affordable, this is one of those services, outsourcing your payroll, that just makes sense to do. The regulations change, there's seismic shifts in the types of coverage and levels of coverage that people need on an ongoing basis. So, kind of between those two factors is where we have the discussions with boards and executive teams.
Jenna, let me end with a couple of questions where I ask you to put on your prognostication cap and maybe look down the road to 2030 or beyond. Number one, what excites you the most about the potentials of AI? And then where do you see your company or your space in 2030?
Yeah, so great question. First and foremost, for our customers, for the businesses that we're working with, the thing that gets me the most excited is their ability to really evaluate how AI can apply to their business. Right? I always say when it comes to looking at AI driven technologies, first of all, get grounded in the business problem that you're trying to solve, and then test, try, evaluate, then invest. And especially when it comes to considering AI based technologies, think about like the vendors that you're working with and their kind of years of expertise and the history that they have. And make sure that it's a vendor where you can test, you can try, you can kind of dip your toe in and see if the solution's really solving for you. And I think if folks take that approach, what'll end up happening is they'll start getting like this snowball effect of how they can get their work, their teams back to maybe more meaningful work. So that's what gets me excited about the customer. It's like get back to the why they started their businesses, why they're in business. For our team specifically, I talked about my role here at my COI is very customer focused, but it's also internally focused, right? I think about how does the advent of AI and tech and the application of technology to our space really allow my teams, the people that show up and work for my COI every single day, to find even more meaning in their work. We talked earlier about kind of the repetitive nature of some of the tasks and processes, and think about how we can reimagine how we deploy talent to increase like the meaning and the excitement in their work. And when it comes to 2030, hey, I'm the COO, not the CEO. So I'll let the supervision casting, I'll leave that to Kristen. But what I know to be true is my COI has been here for 15 years. So when we think about existing in 2030, that means that we're 2 decades in. and just continuing to evolve and leaning into what we're hearing from customers and expanding how we serve them to really lean into those themes of how can we do it faster, even more accurate, and take even more time off their plate or work off their plate.
I was wrong. That's not the end of the podcast because you have opened a door to an area I have not heard anyone talk about. And it's what you just said about the culture of your company and how you're actually using AI to drive excitement for employees to develop new strategies, new tools, new techniques. I've heard a lot of talk about AI making us more efficient, allows us to maybe do things quicker, better, faster. But you're talking about it, or at least I heard you say, we're actually using it to drive culture. Could you end by maybe saying a few words on that? Because I have not heard anyone say that.
So I think again, AI, we always talk about time savings and accuracy and precision, but I personally challenge myself and our company to be thinking about how can we use tools to make our team show up and find more meaning and value in the work that they're doing. And AI is great, but it's never going to replace human connection. It's never going to replace extreme critical thinking. It's never going to replace that feeling of cross department collaboration, of winning together as a team. So if we think about how can we shift from kind of the routine to the more strategic, man, people show up and get fired up about what they're doing more and more. And so I don't think that's specific to our company. I think that's something that leaders are thinking about kind of business wide. But I think if deployed in the right way, AI can not only make us more efficient and effective, but it can also make us find more meaning and value and excitement in our work.
Jana, now we are at the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted to connect with you or find out any more information on My COI, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
Yes, so I'll give you three. You can always find me on LinkedIn, but our company page on LinkedIn is very active with resources and guides and tools to help folks kind of work through the COI processing evaluation process and just best practices there. And then always our company website, mycoitracking.com.
Jana, I wanted to thank you again. This has been great, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be with you today.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet. Every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.